I want to welcome you once again to Stefan Frank's Photobook Show. This is the 12th Photobook Show Stefan is doing. And for those of you who don't know, for those of you who are new, in this photobook series, Stefan looks at recent and not so recent photo books that you might or might not know about. And today's subject is Fotografiks. I'm Anja from StrudelmediaLive. We offer live online photography classes for people from all around the world. We just announced our winter classes, and I just want to very briefly tell you about them. Stefan will actually teach 2 classes this winter. One class is called Things on Tables, an introduction to the conceptual still life. So I highly recommend this class. It starts on January 11, and it's a six session class. He will also teach a class on Gestalt theory for photographers. That's a very popular class. I think it's the 3rd time already that he's teaching that. We are also welcoming 2 brand new teachers to Strudel Media Live. Helena Goni, she is from Spain and she's based in New York, and she will teach a class where you can use your own photographic archives to create news stories. So if you have a lot of photos sitting in boxes or in your computer and you don't know what to do with them, this is the class for you. And another new teacher will be Dortje Fink. She's in Germany, and she will teach a history class on European contemporary photography, and she will cover the years from 1950 to 2000. We are also having 1 session mini workshops. They are only 1 hour long, and they are only $39. We have 3 of those. Some of them are about Lightroom. One is about photographing your family. And then other classes coming up are a video diary class where you also learn Premiere Pro. We have a class on flash photography. There is the very popular InDesign class for people who want to create, who want to design their own photo books and zines. There are 2 feedback groups. I will be teaching a feedback group that's called Diving Deep. So if you want to go deeper with a long-term project, join me. It's only monthly. Once per month we meet. And another feedback group is with Kai McBride, and that will be for black and white photographers, and that's every other week. I also want to remind you that most of our classes, we only accept 8 students, and some actually only 6 students. The video class and the InDesign class, we only accept 6 students. So all of our classes are small groups only. Check out our website or Instagram to see the full program. And then back to Stefan's Photobook Show. If you want to watch previous episodes, you can find them on our YouTube channel. All the recordings are there. If you want to ask questions during Stefan's talk, you can simply unmute and ask, or you can put the question into the chat. His talk will be about an hour long. And yeah, Stefan, thank you so much for doing another episode of your Photobook Show. Enjoy.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for being here tonight, or for a day, whatever time it is, because here in Germany it's already pitch black and very, very cold. Let me share my screen with you to tell you a little bit about what we will be talking about today. We'll be talking about this guy that you see on Stefan's iPhone there somewhere. This will be David Carson. Fotografiks. This is actually an artificial word. So this word doesn't really exist. It's a combination of photography and graphics. David Carson is not a professional photographer. He is a professional graphic designer, and this is his angle, and this is the reason why we'll be looking at his work today. So, I've read in the introduction for today's course that most photo books we look at today have a very simple structure. They have a structure. I've got a big picture on the right or on the left, and I got a title or a caption on the left. This actually has the original, one of the first, in the first photo book that was ever produced. This is, of course, William Fox Talbot, The Pencil of Nature. This is from 1846. So this was where photo books actually began. He did this kind of books basically to promote his new ways of making photographers, because he was the one who invented the negative process, the positive negative process. So he did this to promote his new technique. And if you look at the design here, of course, the design was very simple, because at that time it was very hard to reproduce these reproduce photos. So this was actually the first book where he made it possible to actually have photos inside a book. This was a new one, and so as a consequence, the layout and the design was very much steered by what the techniques of this time allowed. So he had this tipped in photographs here. And this is not the curious thing. The curious thing about that is that this pattern, this way of doing a photo book, this pretty much stays the same until today. If you look at classic photo book like this one here in the Americans, Robert Frank, this is how it is. This is how photo books look. You have a lot of white space. You have a photo on the right, and you have some space around to make sure that it really stands out, that you really have the place to view this picture. So this is a good working strategy to present photos. Robert Frank, he did has a lot of landscape photos here, but he has some portrait photos here. If you do it like this, this also will work. So you can get a layout that works for both landscape and portrait. So of course, this is winning formula. It becomes a little bit more complicated for people like Jim Goldberg. He has also been using this kind of formula in his book Rich and Poor from 1985. But he made it a little bit more interesting. So his strategy is he only has these landscape photos here. So he photographed rich people and poor people and asked them to write something to their pictures. So the design strategy here was also very simple, very straightforward. So he put the pictures on the left and on the right, and he made them, he interposed the actual handwriting of the people that wrote something for the pictures here. He put it on top of that. But you immediately see that this loosens up the whole layout completely. So the layout is very different from what we see with Robert Frank here. Of course, but the standard strategy for that was pretty much with every classic that you have, it's like that. It is a picture on the right, it is a caption on the left. This is William Eggleston's guide. Strategy works with black and white and works with color photography. This is nothing that has eventually stopped. This is still in place, very much in place today. So even though the technology has changed a lot and we can do a lot of other stuff today, even Alex Soss, Sleeping by the Mississippi from 2004, he used the same strategy. Huge photo book, huge prints, lots of white space, lots of breathing room for the picture. But a very simple strategy. If you look back into the history, people have used different strategy to loosen things up. This is New York is good, life is good, and good for you in New York, of course, from William Klein from 1956. He uses all kinds of ways to lay out the picture. So he uses these full bleed pictures here, where you have a picture that goes over the whole frame. He has multiple combinations in here. He has these tiny boxes there in the left, and he combines it. This is messier because the book is about a town that is much messier. So his photography is all about the juxtaposition of images. So when you have these pictures like this famous one that you see in the bottom right here, we usually know that picture standing alone, but here it gives a different picture if you just put the whole sequence together. So all of these strategies, the backbone of all of these strategies is a grid. So the grid is one of the most important graphic design element that is not only used in photo books, but generally in books, generally in magazines. Pretty much everybody is using that. So this goes back to the Swiss design. Josef Müller-Brockmann, he was a Swiss designer. So he was very into a very rational, a very controlled way of designing, strong type, a lot of ordered text, and underneath it you have most of the time you have the famous Helvetica. Everybody's using it. And he made wonderful work with it. You get a very even, rational way of looking at things. They are very good balanced out because the backbone of this, the grid that is underneath it, this gives great coherence to your book. Pretty much everybody designer has one book or another about this typographic grid that is underneath that. That usually starts with the laws of the grid, how it is designed, but it eventually comes to things like den Raster überlisten, or getting around the grid, so not using the grid as it is meant to be. So you get a lot of these very rational layouts for that. That give you a very coherent way of laying out your text and your images for a book. You get these ideas about a very strong compositional, relational ways, like the golden ratio, that is one of the backbones of these grids, of the construction of these grids. And this works, of course, this works very well when you have a lot of text and a lot of pictures and you want to make it construct this in a way that is very coherent. For example, this was a catalog for a big Walker Evans retrospective. And these kinds of catalog work usually has a lot of text, a lot of introductory text about the photographer, but it also has a lot of photos in there. And when these photos are always aligned to the grid and the text is aligned to the grid, you get a very coherent feeling about the book. So it's better than just throwing your pictures right in there and have your type run all over the place. So this is very, you can do a lot of stuff with that, and it still will be looking good. But as I already mentioned, there is always this one chapter in these kinds of books that are about getting around the grid, so not using the grid. So, and getting around the grid has some kind of history, as I already started with Fox Talbot and his first leap in photography. So here's the second leap of photography, of publishing photo books. The next leap was the invention of desktop publishing. Before that, before we had personal computers, people were pretty much limited in what they could do. So this revolution of desktop publishing that started somewhere in the 80s, in the late 80s and early 90s. We had these kinds of big gray boxes, this Macintosh. We had the first initiations of Adobe Photoshop. We had Quark Express, which was the first publishing software. And very soon this opened up a whole box of new possibilities. Designers Republic, they were very good at that. They did a lot of stuff with these kinds of, if you compare to today's software, with these very rudimentary tools. And this brings us to the guy we were talking about. These are magazine covers from David Carson. He was one of the designers that have been started using these kinds of new tools to gain a new freedom and to break away from the grid and break away from the idea that you have this very standard way of laying out a book with one picture on the right and a caption on the left. And if you look at these covers here, he has been working with photography all his life. So photographs have always been part of his work when he designs the cover of the magazine. But if you remember the initial pictures of William Fox Talbot, we've come a long way. And he has a very liquid way of using photography. And this is basically where this comes from. So he has been a surfer. So he surfed professionally. So before he did some kind of magazine stuff, he was just surfing. And he has been part of the West Coast scene and has lived a long time in Los Angeles, has been a long time on the beach. So before he was doing any kind of magazine work, he has just been surfing. He started as an art director at Beach Culture, which was one of the initial magazines that dealt with this kind of surf scene. Later, he worked at Ray Gun, which was a musical magazine. When we will be looking at his work and his photographs and his photographic books, we'll look a lot at these kind of free-form, freestyling design, but that has by no means means that he doesn't know the rules. So he knows all the rules. He knows pretty much everything that there is to know about graphic design. To actually be very good at breaking the rules, you have to have a font knowledge of the rules. So he mentioned in a call that he had about this initial. This was the first, you see on the left, the first issue of Beach Culture. He mentioned a lot of designers, among them an almost forgotten Czech designer, Ladislav Sutna, who has been doing these kinds of freewheeling, free-forming graphic designs already in the 30s. So, and he was very influenced by that. And if you look at his work, you see a lot of these influences from earlier strands of design. And this is, for me, this sums up his mantra. Graphic design is even more about communication than photography. But he always said that you should not mistake legibility for communication. So his idea was not, if you can read it, if you can properly read it, it's good. If it transports a certain feeling, if it transports the feeling of surfing, then it is good design for him. So a lot of his work is about this. It is about freedom. It is about breaking away from the grid. And this is the reason why I am looking at him, and especially why I'm looking at him again now in the context of photo books here. So, and with this introduction, sorry, I gotta. Let me zoom onto this. Let me show you the first thing. So Carson is some kind of a design superstar. So he has been commissioned to do a lot of magazine work. I found this one. This is an old Zeit magazine, Zeit Time magazine. It's an equivalent of the Time magazine. So it's a huge newspaper here in Germany that comes out once a week. And he did the whole magazine for them. And this was for the Zeit magazine, that was quite a step, because the Zeit magazine is very conservative. So they are very careful in bringing in new designers and bringing new ideas, because they have a different, they speak to different people. So they have a very different audience. I find it very interesting to look at this, because it is always something in between. So you see that he is using a lot of, he is breaking a lot of rules in the idea that he's using a lot of different types. He's not restricting himself to just one type and one grid, but he's using a lot of types and a lot of grids. But it's difficult to do to be halfway. And here he is a little bit halfway. So he's halfway between, this is how the Zeitmagazin usually looks, and this is how David Carson does it. So you have pictures like that you can hardly differentiate from the pictures that he has been using before. But then you get pictures like this, you get double spreads like this, and they are very different. So this is something that you usually do not see in these kinds of magazines, because they have a different vibe. And I've been looking at these because you see here that he's using photography in a different way. Let me quickly jump to one of the things that I like most. So this is a different way of dealing with photography. And this is, I think for us as photographers, this is very important to know, to get in touch with designers like Carson, who look at a picture and are not afraid to cut it at weird angles. This is something that we as photographers tend to not do. So for us, the composition is usually done in camera, and after that, nothing will ever happen to the pictures. For Carson, this is, the photograph is pretty much only his material, his starting point. So he starts from there and he takes everything that is in the picture and does something with it. This is, as I was saying, he comes from a background of surfing, of sun and air and freedom. And this is a very bleak story. This is a story about the Chechenian wars, the aftermath of this Chechenian wars. And I find it very striking to see these pictures again. These are usually much larger. He cut in dramatically here, and he put these figures to the side, and he put this, die Erde blutet, the earth is pours blood. He put these words right on the page, and this is a very striking image, and this is very different from just having the title of the piece somewhere. He's making some kind of statement with his graphic design, and this is part picture, part layout, and part typography. And I find it very interesting that he's able to do these kinds of very traditional photographic stories, which have a very serious background, and he does a really good job with that, with transporting the bleakness of that and the urgency of these pictures, bringing out the urgency of these pictures. And these are just subtle changes that he brings here, like adding here these frames in here that tell something, make it somehow feel more real. So this is really a wonderful example of how he uses his way of photography to underline a message that is not only positive, but that says something about a very serious issue. It eventually breaks down. So here is just like the Zeitmagazin always looks. So this is an example of, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This is how David Carson does food photography. And of course, these kinds of magazines are vehicles for advertisement. So this, of course, is the advertisement for the big gray beige Apple box that we've seen in the beginning. Let me come to the first book here. So he did this book together with Louis Blackwell. This is The End of Print. For many people, this is one of the reasons why I picked him up again right now, because I've been thinking a lot about the end of photography. So he has been thinking a lot about the end of print. That was a lot of on the minds of the people in the 80s and the 90s, and with the beginning of the internet. where the magazine world was completely changing. Everybody was talking about the internet. Magazines go onto the net, and no one will read anymore, will read newspapers anymore. And in one way, he was right. So the magazine landscape has transformed completely since the 90s. A whole lot of jobs have disappeared. A whole lot of magazines have disappeared. But of course, it was not the end of print. So we still have a lot of magazines today. Even David Carson is working for magazines today. So this is one of my, as you see here, one of my most favorite books, read and read and read again. Which contains a lot about his process, a lot about his way of looking at things. And I just picked out some examples that show you how he works with photography here. So here he always starts with a photograph, but he just superimposes his typography on top of that. And being a photographer, you have to get comfortable with that. So he has had a lot of beef with not only with photographers but also with writers, because there was one famous incident where he just he got the text for an article, he got the pictures, and he set all the text in dingbats. So in a sign typo, so you couldn't actually read the text at all, because he said, oh, the text was really shitty, so I didn't print it. So I thought it would be better that way. So as a photographer, you will have to relax if you want to work with him, because he treats your photography as material. He has a liquid way of using photography. So he uses photography and superimposes all kinds of typography on top of it. And he produces some really spectacular double spreads here. So Ed Feller, another designer, said about him, David Carson is the Paganini of typographers. So he has he has an excellent feel for typography. What can you do with it? How does a word feel? How does a letter feel? What can you do with it? How can you twist it, shape it, bend it? And you see in this book always popping up his background from the surf and the skateboard scene. He has been very influential in that scene. He has influenced a lot of designers that worked in magazines afterwards. Yeah. But it also helps you to redefine what a good picture is. So a good picture is does not necessarily have to be picture perfect, doesn't have to be the super best composition. It doesn't have to be super sharp. It can be blurry. It can have one blotch of beautiful color, and he can twist it into something that is just beautiful. So from his, I think from his photography and from his use of photographs, we can learn a lot about how we look at our own pictures in a different way. And we'll just quickly flip through this, because this contains a lot of his work for beach culture, this surf, the surf and music magazine that he worked first for. Like, that's what I said. You have to brace yourself for the impact of David Carson on your images, because it can happen. You send him a wonderful portrait, and he just cuts out the face out of it. So this here sums up what I think about David Carson. So he is just like this wave that goes through the magazine world and gathers up all these kinds of technical and typographical materials and molds it into something that really feels like surfing in print. What I find fascinating about him is how how many different ways he uses, like this one, where he just cuts out the background completely and just scatters some words aside. So again, here, this is, if you boil it down, this is the very same formula, one picture and a lot of white space, but interpreted in a very different way. Wonderful book, can't recommend it highly enough. This, of course, is not the end of print, because there's always a second edition to the end of print. The second edition, I just want to show you quickly some examples here. The second edition is all about intuition. This is one of the other foundations of his design. He's not using design in a very strict academic way. He is using a lot of intuition. This is the reason why he ditches the grid. He says, I can't let the grid make decisions for me. It's my decision where things go. So he's shuffling things around. He's moving things around. He's always gathering up new technologies here. So this is work that he did I think in the 2000s, in the beginning of the 3D, three-dimensional software. And here you can see that not everything here ages so well. So this, I'm not a great fan of this. I can see where he's coming from. I can see that he's trying to grapple with new technologies, trying out new programs. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But for me, this is something that makes it even more beautiful, because he just tries stuff. He just tries out stuff. He dares to fail. So if you are afraid to break the rules and to bend the rules, you will not go anywhere. I like this quote a lot, because when we talked about the grid and what the grid gives you a great sense of coherence. Things fit together. Text and image fit together because they are located inside the grid. So everything has a place in there. This gives you a very coherent feel. When you flip the pages, you do not think, what's starting now? What is starting now? No, because everything fits together, and this helps you focus on the pictures. I like that he puts in this quotes here. The quote is, probably you can't read it because it says it's not really legible. You have to feel your way into this quote. So what gives you unity and coherence is intuition and feeling. So it's a different way to define coherence. So it's not about, okay, things are mathematically correctly placed. It's intuition and it feels right. So things go where he feels they belong. So if you don't have enough of this, you should get this. But this brings me to the book that I was actually trying to talk about. This is Fotografiks. So Fotografiks is, he's been carrying a camera all his life. So he's been photographing all his life. He's been photographing the stuff he does, like surfing, the stuff he sees, like type. And eventually he brought this together into a book that only contains his own photography. And you see from these pictures here that he has a very different take on photography. He's not interested in telling some kind of story. When we often look at photo books, we often say, okay, what's the story here? Do these pictures fit together to tell some coherent story? No, he's not interested in that. He's interested in conveying certain feelings, in conveying the idea that I was alive at a certain point in time, that I took this plane, And here he talks about Fotografiks and the way that bringing photography and graphic design, type and color and white space together to form some kind of coherence, but a coherence not backed up by a grid, but backed up by intuition and feeling. So this is what you get when you are, a designer and you look at photography in this way. So the things that you see is, well, I could make that big, I could make that really big, and just what remains is this feel of this page, the feel of this color. And I can put something like this here to make another structure out of this. So this is a liquid way of dealing with photography, and cutting our photographs, reusing them, recombining them, putting type on top of it. So it's a very different way here. And I love this one here, because he's going through the world and always looking with the eyes of a designer. So he's always looking at how is type used, how is color used. So we saw this laundromat sign, and he photographed it because it's just instant good design without actually a designer, without a high-class designer behind it, but somebody who just painted this sign in a very beautiful way, and he's just picking this up. But he's also at the core of what photography is, like the idea of conserving memories. So this is not only a very beautiful design, the way he did it, because it's a botched photo, so half of it has a light leak here. But he actually uses this light leak because it allowed him to stretch this photo, which would have probably ended somewhere here, to stretch it over the double spread. And this fading out here actually has a meaning for him. So because this is his old school, so this is the school where he went to. So fading out in this way, and the way that he did this layout, this also transports a certain idea that he wanted to talk about with this photo. This is a study book in composition, in instant composition, because he is looking at the world not as what kind of story do I want to tell, but he looks at the world in the way that what kind of a composition does this hotel room have? And here is an instant composition out of gray and orange, and he just picked it up. There's a lot of these kinds of things that talk about the relationship of text and pictures. What happens when you put these texts right on top of them? How this changes the pictures. So this is also something that you can learn from these kinds of books, because designers are, as they are not only working with the pictures, but with the pictures together with the photographs. They are very sensitive to these kinds of interactions. What happens when you put text on it? What kind of impression does the type make? I could go on raving about this book because it has a lot of these kinds of tiny little things here, tiny little brilliant ideas on how to, like this one, like picking this up, that this is instant typography with this wear and tear that you have. And this is actually a sign from Germany. So for him, it looks totally, exotic and has some typographic value. For us, it just tells us where the next gas station is. So this is all that is. So it's nothing spectacular here, but he picks it up for its graphics quality. So one of my favorite books of all time. So very nearly falling apart, like the end of print. Let me quickly flip through some of the other side here. So why are we talking about David Carson? So David Carson, being a designer and having this fluid way of dealing with photography. There are, of course, photographers who try to get away from this idea of one picture on the right, white space around it, caption on the left. Takashi Homma, he is a Japanese photographer. He has this weird idea to travel around the world into hotel rooms and then shielding all the windows and putting photosensitive paper on the walls and then just poking a tiny little hole into one of these shielded windows to produce some kind of big camera obscura. And he puts this photosensitive paper on the walls. So in this photosensitive paper is a hotel room turned into, this way you end up with a hotel room turned into a camera. And he assembled these photosensitive papers in these books. And the reason why it's called Narcissistic City, because he said it's basically the city looking up upon itself, because it's a hotel room, it's part of the city, and it's looking at itself. So it's a very narcissistic way of doing photography for a city. And the way he does it, he takes these photosensitive paper and he just assembles it into this book. And this is a very nice example made by MacBook because they're reproducing this idea of, okay, I've got this photosensitive sheets and I just put them together. And this is laid out in the photo book design here. So the whole book works like this. And Takashi Homma produces these kinds of juxtapositions here. These are just sheets that are just assembled together afterwards. So just some color. But here, again, you have a very similar way of dealing with photography, not very careful with the composition, but being very fluid, very liquid with how he assembles things, how he puts things together. And just let me jump quickly to the end here, because in the end, he's using photography very much in the same way that David Carson does, in a very graphic way. It becomes more and more graphic, more and more reduced. He reduces it to things that he paints on the directly on the photosensitive paper or on the windows that are between the city and the photosensitive paper, and then he suddenly focuses on the things that he paints on these windows, and then he focuses on this dot here. So he actually embraces all these imperfections that you get when you turn your hotel room into a camera. Of course, it will not be a perfect camera, but he embraces these kinds of imperfections, like these numbers that he picked up on various hotel rooms on the windows. And of course, this book is full of quotes like this one here, where eventually he found a 9 and he eventually found a revolution. And of course, he put it together into the Beatles, the famous Beatles song of Revolution number 9. So, and this is how it ends, in a very graphic way that doesn't talk, where you don't see the city anymore. It's a very similar way of using photography in a graphic way. So this is here we are at the other edge of these kinds of treating photography. Let me quickly jump to Takuma Nakahira's Overflow. Usually I think the Japanese photographers, they are much more open to this kinds of experimentation with your photography. So this book comes from an exhibition Nakahira did that was assembled like this. So he has a careful way of assembling, of putting all these photos of the city together. And again here, he is anti-story. So he's not trying to tell some kind of a story about the city. So he is only connecting these kinds of impressions that he gets from the city. And the way they restaged this exhibition is like this here. So here you see all of these pictures are used multiple times. So they are cut off at certain places and then they reappear with a different cut at other places. And here it appears completely. So you have all these picture material, and it is assembled in very many different ways. And he is embracing all these kinds of juxtaposition that you have here. For example, like these here on the edge, you have it just goes to the edge, and then you have just a sliver on the side of another picture there. And again, this is a way to another way to deal with photography differently from this is my photo, this is my composition, and here I put it on the page. He's also using his photography as some kind of material. And the interesting thing that happens is when you put it like this, you see that you do not only have this layered composition in the way he assembles the pictures, but sometimes you have it inside the pictures, like this here, that is actually a photograph that consists of three parts: this upper part, this thing, this wall in the middle, and this foreground part. So this resembles his way of looking into the world, very closely resembled this cut off way he assembled the pictures in his book. Again, and it's communication. It's communicating a certain feeling. It's not telling a story, but it tells us, this is how I felt. This is how it was when I was in the city. Let's end this with this one here. Again, one of my favorite books. We already have featured some of the Void books. Void is doing beautiful books. It's a tiny green Greek publishing house. They're doing wonderful books. This is part of an open call they sent out to several photographers to answer on the short story from 1924 from Franz Kafka, a hunger artist, der Hungerkünstler. And there is an epilogue in there. And several photographers responded to that, and they made these kinds of tiny little books here out of it. And this is just a paper, so cardboard, that gives it some structure, but basically it's just some leaves tucked together. And this has a similar feeling, a similar fluid feeling. So this book is about how Ackermann feels towards his wife and his child. So he was making all these kinds of pictures when his wife was pregnant and after his child was born. So that brought a lot of memories up about his own upbringing, about his own travels, about his feelings towards her, towards the mother of his child, towards his child. And he expressed this in a very loose, in a very loosely assembled sequence of photographs here. And the beauty of this book, apart from these wonderful double spreads here, the beauty of this book is that you can just pull it apart because it's not bound in any way. So when you pull it apart, it always gives you different juxtapositions, different spreads, different aspects where things come together suddenly. And these different aspects then again connect different ways. So you can basically, what you can do is you can assemble your own photo book of out of this. So, and he's doing this, and Void is doing this very beautiful, with not being very rigid about where they place the photos. They are placing them in a somewhat loosely assembled grid. But it's not, it doesn't feel rigid. It feels very free form here. And the free formness supports this idea of a very free-formed, loose way of telling this story about his family, about him and his family. And they are mixing color and black and white pictures. They have these wonderful double spreads here that you see here, where it just folds out, which brings in not only his story, but the story of his, the story of Europe, the story of his heritage. The stories of Franz Kafka is included here with this picture of Anne Frank that you see here. So it's a very free-form, associative way of talking about his connection to Franz Kafka, to his family, to the world. So, and it ends with these kinds of diary entries, I think. And Void does a wonderful way with this fluid layout where it just flows through these pictures here. So it's a very tiny publication here, but it has some preciousness to it. And I love this also very much. And this is actually already the end here. So I'm right on time today. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Stefan. Wow, very inspiring as always. I mean, it's so fascinating to hear you speak about the use of space within the surface of a book page. You know, as photographers, we deal with space all the time, but then how do you deal with space inside a book? It's very different than when you compose a picture. Maybe it's not so different. So that was really great. Other questions, anybody?
You know, I could just say that well, one, Stefan, I really enjoyed this because it's something that I'm often, you know, I'm teaching this class in design, and so that people can design their own books, and I feel that the early examples you were showing are a completely rational and reasonable and appropriate way to show certain kinds of work, and then there are also, with other kinds of work that have a different kind of message, these completely different ways of showing things. And but sometimes I think it's nice when as you and Anya were alluding to, you know, when you're composing something in a camera and then you're working on a project for a long time, and then you come up with your sequence and come up with your edit and all of that, and then you give them to a designer and they're kind of like, great, I can do all kinds of stuff with this. I think that that's kind of a shock for some photographers, but you know, done judiciously, I think it can really be an interesting way to transform someone's work. But because, you know, a designer's who hasn't been involved with the project for a year or so, or however long somebody's been working on it, comes at it from a very different point of view. I mean, one could think of it in a certain way also about like dealing with music. There's like making the composition and then recording it, and then you give it to the engineer and producer, and maybe they're like, wow, there's so much material here I can do something with. And sometimes somebody might be like, oh my goodness. You know, but actually I do have one question for you. That was a comment. With the William Klein New York book, would you say that that was one of the early times that people have experimented with doing a photo book like this, or is that just a nice example of it?
That's a nice example. That is not the earliest example. There are a lot of, we should probably eventually make a special feature on Czechoslovakian book design, because there are a lot of designers in Czechoslovakia who have been doing stuff like that from the 20s on. There are beautiful examples of that. I think William Klein just had this very he was actually also a very good graphic designer and filmer. So what couldn't he do? So this is I think it's a very good example, and it brings up this thing that you talked about, that has to fit. So it has to be right. It has to be something that fits the pictures. And in William Klein's case, this really brings out this chaotic nature that is already in his pictures, and that is in his that is of course also in New York at the time when he photographed it. So he is a good example for being a good fit.
Still a level of chaos here.
Yeah.
We have a few other questions. Stefan, thank you so much. Joel, would you like to be next? What's your question? If you just click the, yeah.
I'm fascinated by this new aesthetic. I tend to put my self-published books together in the what you call the traditional way, but you know, thinking about it, this is a form of storytelling in which the individual photograph is not necessarily a final aesthetic object. And in fact, you know, there are all kinds of levels of depth, the levels of richness in photographs. Some photographs demand or reward contemplation. You know, you get into it, it draws you in. Other photographs you go by quickly, the immediate experience. Most photographs are in fact a form of immediate experience. And I find that these books, which I'm very attracted to, I mean, going to Polycopie in Paris and seeing the various photo book fairs, people make amazing personal stories. However, the individual photographs aren't necessarily as powerful as those in, say, a William Klein book, or you mentioned, you showed Michael Ackerman at the end. I mean, I saw him at Paris Photo, and I say, here's the new version of his End Time City, in contrast to the old, bigger version. He was signing versions of this. These are photographs that really invite you into them. And I think that photographs like that would lose power if they're placed in a composite on a page. I mean, yeah. Even though the trend these days is storytelling through photographs that have less aesthetic draw individually necessarily, and then but then put together they make a coherent whole, as you're showing us.
That's a very good point, because I put some of, if you look at some of these David Carson examples, he's not actually interested in the photograph,
right?
So this is, if you look at this thing here on the line, this is certainly not a good photograph, but it works. It works in the way that he's using it. But you have to juxtapose something on it. He puts this thing here, so this dotted, this blotted line here on top of it. He puts another photograph next to it, and he's really observant to these kinds of, how does this matter flow, and how does it flow into here? None of these pictures is really good. Putting together, that's great graphic design.
There's a syntax to them.
Yeah.
A collective syntax.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, Stefan. I wanted to go on to the next question already.
Go on. Yeah.
Just because of time. Arsh, do you want to be next?
Hello, thank you.
Thank you, Joel.
Stefan, you had mentioned in one of the frames that a certain spread, I think, evoked a certain feeling, but didn't go too deep or too much into communicating something. So I had a question that does this like free-flowing approach, which feels a bit like maybe a street photography book, like having very less restrictions, does it affect storytelling? Like, do you end up just being in the surface, just communicating feelings more?
This is another good point. So there are a lot of good interviews with David Carson. So he has a lot of critics say you're actually overwhelming the story. You're actually overwhelming the pictures with your graphic design because you're so present. You're so dominant that you blot out the thing that we actually wanted to talk about. So the story that is in the picture, the story that is in the text. So this is the reason why I put this one up here. If you look at a lot of work by Carson, he's very good at getting a feel for what is it that you want to communicate. And he's very good at feeling into the story, feeling into the musician. So he did a lot of music. So he did a lot of articles on musicians. So he listened to a lot of this music. And then only after he listened, he made the design. So he just made sure, okay, I'm transporting the music there. I'm not necessarily transporting what's in the text. When I think the article is shitty, I just set it in Dingbat. But I make a statement that is fitting to the story that I want to tell. So this is the reason why I put this up here, because here he is really stepping back with his design, and still he is supporting the message. So he has a different way of communicating the bleakness of the situation. He's very much muted here. So this is why I think sometimes he goes over the top. Sometimes he just takes a picture and takes just the one color out of it because he feels like it. But he is in his heart, in his core, he is a communicator. So he tries to communicate the story, the feeling that is in the story, and I think he's very good at that.
Thank you so much. There's another question by Shell. Shell, I don't see you, but can you hear me? There you are.
Hi.
Okay.
Great presentation. Enjoyed that so much. When you first introduced David Carson, Stefan, you mentioned that you have been thinking a lot about the end of photography, and that had drawn you into to Carson's work. Could you elaborate on that a little bit, please? The end of photography.
So the end of print was done at a time when there was massive changes in the way print was used, in the way magazines were used, in the way newspaper was used. It was the beginning of desktop publishing, as I already mentioned. It was the beginning of the internet. So everybody at that time was very much aware there's a big change coming up. And of course, it was Lewis Blackwell who did this book with him, and David Carson. They were very much into this idea. Wow, there's a tremendous amount of change coming up. I was thinking about that period of time because where we are right now with photography, with the changes in artificial imagery, for example, with the changes in how we consume pictures. We are certainly not at the end of photography, but we are, I think, at a similar junction there. So it feels, again, a little bit like that time. There is massive change coming, massive change that comes through social changes, through technological changes. And I think photography as we know it is coming to an end, but that does not mean photography has to end. It just has to change radically. And this is where my connection came from, where I've been looking at this book again, and why I've been putting up this one, because after the end of print, there's always a phase 2. So after the end of photography, there will always be a phase 2 for photography.
Right. Thank you, Stefan. And there are 2 questions, I think, in the chat, Edward.
Yes. One of them is, what is the title of the book that you were showing about the typographic grid?
It was called like this, der typografische Raster, the typographic grid.
And is that the one you wanted? Yes. Okay, that is the one you wanted. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
We also have a question from Fran. Do you think there should always be a coherence between the book design and the photographs?
Well, I tend to say yes. I tend to say it doesn't have to be it doesn't always have to be that obvious, probably. But again, I think graphic design is about communication. Photography is also about communication. And in the end, coherence, as we've seen it, is about intuition and feeling. So when it feels right, and then it is coherent. So some kind of coherence you have to achieve one way or another.
Because I think otherwise it would be distracting. It would just simply feel as bad design or bad photography, one of the two.
Or both, yeah. Yeah.
Or both.
Yeah, that's pretty much what when we talked about, okay, you have a certain story and you want to transport a certain story. You cannot so always coming back to this one double spread here. You cannot do a double spread like this about the Chechen war with the design he's been using for talking about surfing. It just doesn't work. It just feels wrong then. So, and it's intuition. It has to feel right.
Okay, I think.
Actually, you know, there was one other comment from Joel in the chat, and I thought I'd mention it because he is saying that these novel layouts turn photography towards a time-based art form. And actually something I'm often mentioning in my class is that I think about when you're designing books, that whereas maybe in a gallery you're looking at something moving on, in a book it's actually definitely a time-based experience that one can treat the same way you would treat a narrative that somebody is experiencing over time, whether that narrative is music or something else. What do you think about that, Stefan?
Yeah, good point, but I would argue against this because I love this book to death. So it's one of my favorite books ever. But you can open it up anywhere and flip into any direction and be inspired. So it has a different, so although it has these numbers up here, it doesn't has a linear kind of time. And I feel they are very much, hey, look at this one and look at that one, and there is no time connection here. It's just more, it is a little bit more, feels a little bit more like a catalog. It has some flow to it, but as there is no story behind it, it doesn't progress in any way. And this is something that I would wish from when I think about time and film in a photo book, then I would wish it would go somewhere. This doesn't go somewhere necessarily. It's just one beautiful thing after another, which is a different kind of photo book, different thing.
Well, there are all kinds of sequence, you know. What you're saying is that these things may have a kind of a palindromic coherence, that you can look at them forwards or backwards, or you can take parts out and see them. That what you're saying is that the juxtaposition works in two directions and can work as subsets and as large sets. That's very powerful for a group of images. And you're saying that the collectivity and the sequencing add something to the images in whatever direction and whatever subset. That's perfectly coherent. It doesn't contradict the notion that some of these books benefit from being read front to back as a typical beginning, middle, end narrative.
Right, but these are two different ways of looking at stories. So he's looking at graphic stories. So he's looking at, okay, how do these things connect on a graphic level? When we look at photography, we often we try to look behind the photograph. Well, what is the story behind the photograph? What I love about Carson that he's very superficial. So he's very much on the surface of things.
Surface
And there are a lot of stories to be told about the surface of things, how colors blend into one another, like this one here, and moving like this. So there's a different kind of movement on a different level.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Time is up. Well, actually, we went over, so
Sorry for
by
that.
quite
Carried
a
away.
bit. And I will, end our session now. So, Stefan, again, this was great. Another great presentation, very inspiring. Thank you all for joining. There will be another one probably in the first week of January. Wishing you happy holidays already, and please keep our upcoming classes in mind, which will be starting also in January. So thanks for being here, and see you next time.
Thanks.
Okay,
So,
thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
so much. Bye. Good to see you.